That, I am happy to welcome everybody to the February All Members meeting. And I'm also happy to introduce for you one of our 20 under 35 2023 cohort members, Justina Castianca, who is also co-chair of SSPI-WISE STEM Outreach Working Group and is here to introduce our speaker for the day. So Justina, I'm gonna spotlight you and you can take it away.
Thanks, Tamara. While we have this time too, I'd also like to remind folks that we have our SSPI-WISE scholarship for Satellite 2024 going on. We have extended it to both students and early career people in our community. So please get the word out. Applications close tomorrow. So with that, I will introduce Heidi White, a fellow STEM co-chair, who will be giving a talk on how to be a little bit more inclusive when doing STEM outreach. Heidi White is an outreach officer at the Université de Montréal and an educational content developer at the University of Toronto. Originally from Chicago, she earned her PhD in astrophysics from the Dunlap Institute for Astronomy and Astrophysics in 2021. Her research specializes in star formation and galaxy kinematics, with a focus on the evolution of galaxies during cosmic noon, approximately 10 billion years ago. Dr. White is passionate about science communication and education, spearheading initiatives to bring astronomy learning to underserved populations globally. She co-founded the Pan-African School for Emerging Astronomers, providing astronomy learning opportunities to STEM undergrads across Africa. Additionally, she is involved in preserving Indigenous sky knowledges and integrating non-Western perspective of the night sky into education. Dr. White is a familiar face in Canadian media, regularly serving as a science expert for local and national news outlets, as well as appearing in several globally distributed TV series. Her commitment to outreach is rooted in her belief that every individual should have equal access to education and in the profound impact science communication can have on inspiring future generations. So she's the person to talk to. So I'll let her take it away. Thank you, Dr. White.
So hello, everyone. Thank you, Justina, for that little introduction. It saves me a slide, actually. And thank you, Tamara. Thank you to the SSPI-WISE community for inviting me to give this talk today. So the title of my talk is Insights and Strategies for Meaningful Engagement of Underserved Communities in STEM Education. And can people just sort of give me a thumbs up that they see my screen, my title slide, everything is going well? Okay, good, then I can proceed ahead. This is a relatively short talk. It's going to be about 30 to 40 minutes. And it is sort of a redo of a talk that I gave at Harvard a couple of months ago. So it was really well received. So hopefully you all find it enriching today. So Justina already did a lovely bio, but indeed I am a little bit different in terms of being a member of the SSPI-WISE community because I do not come from a space background, an industry background. I am an academic, I'm an astrophysicist by training, and although I have spent roughly the last 9 years of my career in, either studying or working in academic research, I have been doing a lot of outreach and education work, particularly in non-institutional settings. And by that, I mean outside of your typical K through 12 or university sphere. I'm currently the outreach officer, as Justina said, for IREX and Observatoire du Monde Mégantic. But I also work on contract doing educational content development for the University of Toronto. Now, over the course of my career, much of my work has focused on bringing astronomy learning to underserved and underrepresented groups in STEM. And this work has challenged me in many ways as an educator and really forced me to acknowledge my own internal biases about how people learn, where people learn. And this process of learning by teaching has really been an ongoing one for me. As if you've ever worked in education or outreach, you probably have found it like that as well. Now, before I jump into things today, I also want to mention that we often invoke, we talk about things like inclusive education. We often invoke this term of best practices. You probably heard it even in your own careers. We develop, we try things, we see what works, and we develop a model that we call best practices, which we feel like is the most effective approach to doing something. In the context of education, I really struggle with this phrase because it implies that we can develop sort of a one best fit approach to teaching. And in my experience, this is really not true. Now, when our audiences include members of underserved and disproportionately impacted groups in particular, this best fit mindset can sometimes be quite harmful in that it assumes that all members of all groups function as a monolith. They all have the same needs, they all have the same goals, they all have the same learning styles, they all come to the table with the same lived experiences, and we know this to not be the case. Whenever we are teaching, we are learning. We are all learners, even when we teach. And learning is a process that invites us to make mistakes and be open to feedback and be open to criticism. And when we consent to this practice, it is what's known as learning in public. And I want to highlight that because I think it's a really important step, especially for those like myself that arrived in this space and in many spaces from a place of privilege, that we consent to learning in practice whenever we're working with communities that are outside of our own. Now, over the past decade or so, I have been afforded some truly incredible opportunities to participate in really unique outreach initiatives. And so today, I'd like to share some insight that I've gained into what I've found leads to effective and meaningful engagement. So I'm going to start off with a brief overview of the core initiatives that I've either co-led or led. And my journey in education really starts with PASEA. So PASEA, as Justina said, is the Pan-African School for Emerging Astronomers. Way back at the start, we were known as WISE because we primarily focused on reaching communities in West Africa. But over time, we have been able to really expand. And sorry, I'm hearing a bit of an echo. Okay, I'm hoping it's resolved. And so over time, we've been able to expand over the last almost 12 years now, and we are now Pan-African. So we are working with communities from all across the continent. PASEA is an initiative that I co-founded alongside my colleagues, Dr. Linda Struba, Dr. Jilai Zhang, and Dr. Bonaventure Okere in 2013. And so, the thing to know about PASEA is that it is an over 10-year project that aims to bring astronomy learning to STEM-interested young adults across Africa. Now, every aspect of PASEA, all of the content, all of the programming is designed around engaging students' interests and centering their learning goals. And this is really quite unique because oftentimes in outreach and educational initiatives that are designed for underserved communities, we too often see these, especially abroad, international teams, they just sort of parachute in, they deliver this predetermined content, and then they book it, they head out. And the impact to the communities is often very, one-off. And the goal for PASEA is to not only make a long-lasting impact in these communities, but also provide a forum for students to explore astronomy and foster their scientific curiosity and their self-identity as scientists. And so the way we do this is we design the entire school centered around the students. Another initiative that I want to mention that is supported by the Dunlap Institute for Astronomy and Astrophysics at the University of Toronto is Astrodigenous. So Astrodigenous is it's a project that's been around for probably the last 5 years. I have been a part of it for the last 3. And Astrodigenous is an online repository that aims to, in a small way, create space for Indigenous sky knowledge in Canada. Now, in the Canadian educational system, it is a requirement between K through 12 in most provincial curricula that in some sense, Indigenous knowledge systems should be taught in the classroom or incorporated or discussed. But despite it being a requirement, most children in Canada grow up never learning about these knowledge systems. And so the students all leave the educational system with a very narrow perspective of the local night sky. And so you can head over to our website at astrodigenous.ca to check us out if you're interested. And our goal with Astrodigenous is to not only create space, but really just connect K through 12 teachers in Canada with examples of what we call Indigenous sky knowledge. So these are examples of either storytelling, practices, traditions. We've identified over 300 that you can find in our searchable database that then teachers can learn about and feature in their classrooms. Now, I want to highlight that our goal here is not just to connect the teachers with these resources, but to support the teachers, the educators, in featuring these resources in an intentional and non-appropriative way. We need to be very careful when we sort of connect settler background Canadians with these stories and these examples of these knowledges, because we want to make sure that they're not being used sort of in a tokenized way, right? And so it's most important to us that these resources are presented in a way which respects the Indigenous traditions from which they're derived. And so one really important thing that we've done, in addition to curating this collection of hundreds of examples of Indigenous sky knowledge, is creating resource guides and positionality exercises for teachers. We strongly encourage them to work through these exercises and go through these guides before they start featuring these knowledges in their classrooms. I don't have time to go deeply into this now. If you are interested in learning more about these documents and how we design this, you can feel free to reach out to me or ask in the question session. But these are documents that invite teachers to explore their own relationship to the land, concepts related to decolonization, and their own positionality with respect to the resources in our database. And then finally, we have Beyond the Stars. This is an initiative that I founded a few years ago with support from Julie Bozoc-Duval at Discover the Universe. And the goal of Beyond the Stars is to bring opportunities for hands-on astronomy learning to Indigenous youth in remote communities in Canada. And in short, what we aim to do is guide high school level students, but also young adults that are in workforce training programs in telescope observation projects to learn about astronomy and how science is done and take part, be scientists, or practice the work of scientists. And this program aims to help address the learning opportunity gap that exists between Indigenous and settler communities in Canada. Now, there are a couple things that are really unique to this project. The first of which is that we really try to adopt a decolonizing approach to teaching. So we work with local knowledge keepers and elders where possible, because it's not always the case in communities that there's availability for this, to incorporate Indigenous knowledges and pedagogies into every aspect of our program. And so one thing that's really unique about this is that every community we work with kind of gets a different set of programming because it is really tailored to the local traditions of the land in which they inhabit. Another interesting thing about this program is that our observing project that we do, when we take we have access to telescopes. We actually have access to multiple observatories, but one of which is this global network of robotic telescopes. We have to look at something, and that's what we call in astronomy our target on the sky. And our observing project that we do with Beyond the Stars is entirely motivated by the local cultures and storytelling practices. We use this storytelling as a motivation for selecting our target. And then this is an example of what in education research we call place-based education, which is where learning is a process that immerses learners in local heritages, cultures, and landscapes, and uses these as a foundation for learning. So we ran Beyond the Stars for the first time in 2022, and we had 3 venues. 2 of them were remote in Nunavut, one in the northernmost inhabited community in Canada, and one was in person that we ran in Ontario, in Durham. And this was a fantastic experience for the Beyond the Stars team because it was basically a pilot. We could compare working both, trying to deliver this content, these hands-on experiences online via Zoom, just as I'm delivering this talk today, but also in person, and see what worked best and how to improve this for the future. This upcoming year, or I should say starting next month, we're actually going to be expanding this beyond just the 3 communities we worked with last year to almost 12. So wish us luck. And then I just want to show this. So this is an example of one of the images that were created as part of our Beyond the Stars program. So for the community that I worked with in Ontario in person, I took pictures of the event because we ran it in person, and I obviously asked for consent. You know, is it okay if I use these pictures of you all working in my talks in the future? And they said yes, only on the condition that you show the image that we created together as a team. And so this is an example of what can be created using this global network of telescopes. This is what we call M51, or Whirlpool Galaxy. This is a 3-color image. So this is an image created from taking an image of this galaxy in 3 different filters, so basically red, green, and blue, and then the students work together to combine them to create this beautiful multicolor image of this galaxy and its companion. This is what we call a spiral galaxy. It's located about 24 million light years from us, and so this image that you see is actually 24 million years old because light travels at the speed of light. So these 3 initiatives that I've described today, PASEA, Astrodigenous, and Beyond the Stars, have been, you know, I've worked on a lot of different projects over the last 12 years or so. These are really the ones that have taught me the most. And so they're the ones in which we're basing a lot of what I'm going to be discussing for the rest of the talk on. And the reason I say that they've taught me the most is because, you know, because I arrive in these spaces from a place of immense privilege, my involvement in these projects has really asked me to engage in that process of learning in public, as uncomfortable as it can be sometimes. And over time, I've developed what I think of as good strategies for working in these communities in meaningful and effective ways. And so I've created this little infographic here, but we're gonna, you know, touch on each of these 5 for the rest of the discussion today. So let's start at the top. This is, you know, developing living and adaptive content. So my first tip would be to develop materials, learning materials that are really flexible in scope and, you know, as challenging as it can be, constantly evolving. So as I said, we too often go into these projects with a really clear plan of exactly what we want to teach, exactly how we want to teach it. And what I found over the years works better is focusing less on making sure that your content that you're looking to deliver addresses very specific curriculum goals, like making sure that teachers know exactly how to incorporate in their classrooms, and focusing more on providing a positive and rewarding learning experience. Positive experiences in learning build confidence in learners, and it is one of the most effective ways we combat imposter thinking and imposter thoughts. You know, when individuals have success early on, they are much more likely to believe in their abilities, feel confident enough to explore beyond the scope of the content that you're actually delivering, and be willing to take on more challenging tasks in the future. And this is incredibly important when you're working with underrepresented groups. You really want to build that confidence and make them feel, you know, make them actually understand that they belong there too. It's also important to recognize that many pathways exist to learning. And so when I develop projects now, I try to provide different avenues for investigating the same topic. One of the things that I'm remarking recently is that whenever we incorporate art into our STEM learning, it really enhances the learning experience. Here on the right, you see an image of one of our students for Beyond the Stars, exploring the concept of resolution in images using perler beads. And this is actually an example of where I learned something as well. This was an unexpected outcome. So I had been doing some reading about art therapy and how beneficial it can be. And I had, for my in-person venue for Beyond the Stars, we had 2 full days. So it was much longer than we would get with the communities that we were working with on Zoom. We would have just classroom periods. Whereas in this case, it was actually a retreat, and we would have these learners for 2 full days. And I had to develop 2 days worth of, materials and content. So one of the things I decided was that, we're going to work through planning our observations with the telescope. We're going to take our data, we're going to put those multicolor images together, and then what? I sort of impulsively bought a whole bunch of art supplies off Amazon and brought them with me to the campus. And I brought perler beads and canvases and paints and all kinds of things. And after the students had created their multicolor images, I gave them all of these materials and I said, okay, like I want you to recreate your telescope images using art supplies. You can do it however you want. And what I noticed about the perler beads, if you've ever seen these things, basically they're little grids and you put the beads down and then you iron it and you peel it off and you create like a little pixelated kind of image. Is that the questions that the learner was asking me is, you can see at the top there her phone with her multicolor image, and she's trying to recreate that. And, obviously an image on our phone is many more pixels comprise that image. You have much higher resolution. But as she's trying to recreate it with the perler beads, she's like, but my box of perler beads only has so many colors in it. And now I need this little bead to represent many pixels on my image. So how am I? So that thought of like, lowering the resolution on an image to reproduce it, it led to discussion as a group about why it's so important that we push our technology when we're observing the universe for higher resolution images, because we can get more information from a higher resolution image. And so it was really kind of incredible. I actually did not expect that this was going to lead to this sophisticated discussion of instrumentation and astronomy, but it did, because we opened up our eyes to bringing in different types of learning, for example, art. Now, another thing I've learned time and time again is that you have to be ready to adapt on the fly. Anytime you're running an educational initiative, in particular when you're working in under-resourced kind of areas, is that there are going to be challenges. My tip is to just expect the unexpected, learn to embrace it. One great example of that is my first lecture at PASEA. This was in Abuja, Nigeria. This image you're seeing is actually from PASEA, Zambia, which just happened in 2022, but I don't have a photo, thank goodness, of what I'm going to relate, this story I'm going to relate now. So in 2013, I was an undergraduate student. I was on this team that was going to travel to Abuja, and I was given the task of doing a lecture on exoplanets. Now, I'm a galaxy astronomer. At the time, I was a student studying galaxies. And so I was having to teach exoplanets. I was completely out of my depth. And so I put a ton of time into developing what I thought was like the best exoplanet lecture. Just a little bit of context. An exoplanet is a planet that orbits a star other than the sun, basically alien planets out there in the Milky Way. And I researched everything I could about how we detect them, and I put this lecture together. I practiced delivering it for exoplanet astronomers at the University of Toronto. They gave me feedback. And so when I got on the plane, I thought I had the very best thing I could possibly deliver to these students at PASEA. And when it was time for me to give my lecture, I was all prepared. I plugged my computer in. I put the title slide up. And within 5 minutes of my lecture, the power went out and everything went silent. This is where I was. My computer crashed. Everything was gone. And I ended up having to demonstrate how, like, what is an exoplanet? How do we detect them? All of these processes using my colleagues to mimic stars and planets. And I'm not going to lie, there was a very uncomfortable silence at the start, but it was an incredible learning experience for me. And it was an incredible lesson in learning to adapt on the fly. And so now whenever I develop something, especially if I'm going abroad to deliver it, I always think to myself, what if all my technology that I have learned to rely on disappeared? Could I still explain what it is I want to explain? Could I still get the concepts across to my audience? And another lesson it was for me, especially as someone very junior who had never learned in any sort of environment outside of North America, is that not everybody learns in the same type of environment. I had never thought, it never occurred to me that the power could just go out in the middle of my lecture, because I'd never experienced that before. But depending on where you are teaching, the environments you're in, that can be commonplace. And so it also helped me understand that the places in which people learn across the globe are also very different from the ones I'm most familiar with. Now, the next thing I would say is incredibly important is to make sure that before you go into things, you learn about your audience wherever possible. I cannot emphasize this enough. Make sure you are working with liaisons and community members, because it is always to your advantage. Community liaisons have firsthand knowledge of the challenges, the assets, the resources within the community that is your audience. And this knowledge really helps in identifying and addressing the specific needs, the barriers to access that exist, the opportunities that are available for your audience, making the educational programs that you deliver much more effective and responsive. And one fantastic example of this is Jason. So for Beyond the Stars, I worked with the two communities in Nunavut. And for these two communities, this is what you're seeing is now a little screenshot of one of our Beyond the Stars sessions in Kugluktuk, Nunavut. And Jason, you see there in the upper left, was my liaison. He connected me with the teacher for the science high school classroom. And I worked with him before I delivered the content to tell him, this is what I'm planning, this is how I'm approaching it. When I started off, as I said before, the way Beyond the Stars works is we try to use local cultural practices and storytelling as a motivation for learning the content. And so my plan was that I would start off by leaving the floor to the students and saying, what do you know locally? What kind of local traditions and practices exist around the night sky? And then I would go into talking about how other cultures had seen the night sky, et cetera, et cetera. Jason stopped me and said, hold up. I don't think that's a good idea. And I think it might actually lead to a very negative experience for the students in this classroom. And what I'd failed to think about or realize is that for so many groups, Indigenous groups and populations across Canada, as a result of colonization, there is a level of cultural erasure where these communities and oftentimes members of these communities are disconnected from this storytelling, from the local languages, from various cultural aspects, traditions as a result of colonization. And what he said is, I bet you if you ask this question to them, you're going to get absolute silence. And what that's going to lead to in their experience is this person came in, asked me to represent my culture, and I can't. It is not my own fault. It is because of an unfortunate process that is ongoing in Canada, but nonetheless, it would lead to a very negative and harmful experience for them. And so I was able to work with Jason in the weeks leading up to my first session with this classroom to retool it, rework this process to ensure that it would lead to a positive outcome. And so Jason helped me turn what could have been an unintentionally harmful experience into a positive one, and I am eternally grateful to Jason for that. It's also incredibly important, so this is the next sort of item on our infographic. It's also incredibly important that your teaching teams mirror your intended audience. I came to truly appreciate this, the power of this through PASEA. When you have teaching teams that are diverse in terms of their background and experiences, this brings a much wider range of perspectives into the learning environment. And this diversity, this greater representation, can enrich discussions and help students gain a much more comprehensive understanding of the subject matter. And so what you're seeing there in the top and bottom photo are two examples of teaching teams for PASEA. Now in PASEA, the way that we highlight having a representative teaching team is through our interactive lectures. Our interactive lectures are pair taught, which means that each lecture, save for one that I'll describe in a second, is developed and delivered by both an African astronomer and a non-African based astronomer. And this ensures that every phase of learning incorporates local perspectives. So what you see here is a lecture from delivered by my colleague and now my best friend, Ade Zaibik, and she's delivering a lecture on cultural astronomy across Africa. Obviously, this would be an example of a lecture that would be completely inappropriate for me to deliver, but because we have representation across our entire team, the students are able to take part in these discussions and have this kind of enrichment as a result of, Ada being a part of our team. Now, having a diverse and representative team is not always easy to establish. And then sometimes, because having a diverse team means a global team, means having people across the globe, it can also be very challenging. For example, not all instructors on PASEA are located in regions where electricity, internet, and computing resources are reliably available. So one of the questions, the things that we had to really grapple with on PASEA or as a team is, how do we ensure that all of the instructors on our team, if we want to have a representative teaching team, have equal voice and can equally contribute to developing our school's curriculum? And so since 2015, all of the instructors in PASEA attend a week-long event right before the school. So PASEA as a whole is then 2 weeks. And we call this the instructor workshop. And this is where teaching teams literally come together on the ground to work together to create content, develop teaching plans, and share ideas about teaching and learning. And we find that this workshop is absolutely essential for being able to facilitate collaboration amongst our team and to create an equitable teaching community for all of our instructors. It goes without saying that having representative teaching teams has a huge impact on learner experience. I'll just close this by saying that when learners see themselves reflected in the teaching team, they are much more likely to be open to learning. This is reflected in education research. And when they are more open to learning, in addition to being more open to learning, having a representative team fosters a greater sense of belonging. It encourages diversity of thought, and it leads to a much more rich and inclusive educational experience for all of your participants. I also encourage you to not only listen to community liaisons, but listen to your audience, survey them and their interests before your program runs, continue to listen to them during the program, and always, always ask for feedback. An example of how we do this in PASEA is our daily reflections. You can see a scan of one of the daily reflections we received from a participant in Zambia in 2022. Daily reflections are something we implemented in the first PASEA, so in 2013, and so it's a week-long school, so it's 6 days altogether. Starts on a Monday, and starting the Tuesday morning, we hand out this form to participants where we allocate 15 minutes at the start of the morning where they can reflect on their experiences of the day prior. And so we ask questions like, what was one thing you learned yesterday that made an impression on you? Do you have any other comments? What's something you hope to learn today? In this case, one of the students said, so far so good. So good job, us. We could try solar observing with the telescopes during lunch hour. So the way this works at PASEA is after we have them all fill these forms out, and then when the school day is done, as an instructor team, we bring them all together, we read through all of them, and we get check the temperature of the students effectively. What are they experiencing? What are they wanting to learn more about? And where possible, we implement that. We actually iterate, we modify the rest of the program in small ways to be able to reflect what the students' needs and desires are. And so in this case, we were able to break out the telescopes the next day at lunch and try and do some solar observing. And this is incredibly important because when the students see their feedback implemented and the school shaping as a result of their feedback, it really provides them this feeling of ownership over their learning. So I would say that, it's not always the case where you can do something like this, but wherever possible, try to create space for your audience's voices. Now, finally, one question that I often ask myself now, so I am now I've been in this process of trying to nurture multiple programs over extended periods, is how do I ensure that my program remains sustainable and enduring? This is a hard question. The first thing I would try to recognize is that communities evolve over time, their needs change. Again, stepping away from this idea of best practices into something that's more of an evolving model. Community liaisons, once again, can really help educational programs, like whatever you're trying to run, adapt to these changing needs and help your program remain relevant and effective. So connecting with them wherever possible, asking them for advice on sort of how things are changing with these communities, and being able to adapt your programming is pretty essential. That's step one. Where possible, we're all bandwidth limited, right? Try to establish mentorship programs that can connect underrepresented learners with either faculty or peers. It's because I have delivered this talk in more institutions like university level settings, but certainly within industry, you can find analogs there. But basically what we're saying is people who can provide guidance, support, and a sense of belonging to your audience. We have found, in particular with PASEA, because it's our most long-running program, that having mentorship programs really help students navigate educational challenges and barriers to access, and helps them develop their careers over time, wherever they go. Another really important thing to recognize as well is that educational programs rely on teaching support and instructors. And again, I just want to highlight that I am speaking from sort of an academic background. Oftentimes, like all of the work that I have described, it's not work that I've been financially compensated for. This is volunteer work. These are my passion projects. I have my day job, and that pays my bills, and it's enriching and lovely, but maintaining these is an add-on. And it is the case for a lot of academics who are doing educational work, outreach work. It's rare that you are able to lead programs like this and have this be your job. And so what that means is that it's really crucial that your teaching staff also continue to grow and learn in terms of their professional development. They need to be enriched as well in order to stay on your team and continue working and continuing, pushing your program ahead. Running things like this takes a lot of energy. It takes a lot of people power hours, and there needs to be some level of reciprocity. One way you can do this is by asking them what they're interested in, encouraging them to develop new skills, and whenever their efforts are, encourage your teaching team members to also take ownership wherever possible over how the school develops or the program develops or the content develops. Nourish their interests, encourage new ideas, try to build collaboration, and encourage them to take what they've learned from your initiative and potentially apply it to other things that they're working on. This has often been the case. Just highlighting that, at least in academia, this work is usually an add-on. And so if you do not nourish your teaching team, you will lose your teaching team, and it will be very hard to continue your program or your initiative. So I highly encourage you to remember your instructors as well. Another thing I'll just highlight, so the two ladies that you see there on the right, Adaeze, and Margaret, this picture was taken at PASEA, Zambia. We had gone on a car ride to go check out some elephants, and Adaeze and Margaret are now instructors at PASEA. They were participants in our PASEA 2013 many years ago, and they have since gone on to pursue career paths in academic astronomy. They are now wrapping up PhDs in astrophysics, one in cosmology, one in transient astronomy at the University of Toronto, and they have come back to PASEA as instructors. So once again, one thing that I've found that also leads towards better outcomes sustainability wise is, where possible, allowing your learners to come back in and participate, take ownership over the school as well, participate as instructors. That also really helps your programs sustain over time. And so I'll just leave this up here. This is like a sort of simple infographic for those that are interested in sort of screenshotting or etc. Summarizing the 5 strategies that I've outlined in my talk today. I just want to thank you all for taking the time to listen to me discuss these programs that I am so passionate about, and I keep very close to my heart. And I welcome any questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Heidi. I think we already have a couple in the chat, but anyone who is interested in speaking up, please.
It's Mary. Hi, it's Mary Frost. So I want to ask a question that's totally off the wall, but you must get this question a lot. What kinds of life are there outside of Earth? How do you answer that question?
Oh, okay. So like, what are the prospects for life beyond Earth?
And what kinds of life do you think are out there?
Oh, this is a fantastic question. Okay. I mean, we have not detected concrete examples of life beyond Earth, extraterrestrial life. But if you look at the sheer statistics of the universe, right? Hundreds of billions of stars in a galaxy, ostensibly trillions of galaxies in the observable universe. One really interesting statistic that people are quite surprised to hear, since the 1990s, we have been exploring exoplanets or alien planets around other stars. And just from our tiny bit of searching in our own Milky Way galaxy, we find that on average, there's about 1 planet for every star, okay? 1 to 1. Now, the Milky Way, like other galaxies, has hundreds of billions of stars. Like I said, trillions of galaxies in the observable universe. The sheer opportunities for life are absolutely immense. If you ask me, does life exist beyond Earth and the universe? The answer is yes. We have not detected it, but it is absolutely certain that it exists somewhere out there. I think within our own solar system, the opportunities for life are likely if it exists, it is basic. It is trapped below thick layers of ice in oceans or something like that. Beyond that, deeper into the galaxy, I would say that there could be opportunities for intelligent life out there. It's just that, we're waiting to hear from them. We are listening, but I would say even then in our own galaxy, it is almost certainly the case that intelligent life exists. We've just not connected with them yet.
Thank you.
And from the chat, we have a couple of questions. One was earlier on about resources from these sites. So Beyond the Stars, for instance, is there a way that we can post them or add these links to the SSPI-WISE website?
Yeah, so I would say that so we'll say one, for example, with PASEA, we have developed, we started off as a school that just mainly was aiming to bring astronomy learning. One of the ways in which we've really adapted that school over the years is we got feedback from students saying, this is great, I love learning about planets, but in my community, in my country, in my economy, these are the types of jobs that await for me. And this is the type of training I need to be successful in industry in my part of the world. And so we've implemented what we call our postgraduate stream, which is a much more professional development focus, teaches coding, teaches, most recently, we've been talking about machine learning and AI. Those notebooks that are aimed at sort of providing Python coding training. Those are all available online freely and publicly, and I'm happy to connect SSPI with those and allow those to be linked. For Astrodigenous, that is an online database. Happy to connect the link, and obviously any of the positionality exercises and supportive documents we've created for that. One thing I will say about that is that Astrodigenous as a database, it's not, you can't say concretely because the borders between, for example, the United States and Canada are settler defined. And certainly there's overlap, especially as you get closer to the border, but they primarily represent Indigenous traditions from across Canada, although we are currently in discussion about expanding Astrodigenous to be North American, incorporate more examples in our database from modern day so-called United States, right? These territories. But happy to link that. And then the one I would say that's going to be would be a little bit more challenging is Beyond the Stars. The reason is that one of the most challenging aspects of Beyond the Stars is that even though I created 6 weeks of programming to deliver, because we've worked with communities from all over Canada that represent different Indigenous traditions, I have to have different slide decks for every community. It's a little bit different. And so there's not one core slide deck, but I could definitely work to put something together that's a bit broad and not necessarily specific to one community, and sort of represents an overview of how different cultures have seen the night sky over human history. So
Yeah, that'd be great. Even the Python course module, I think would be great to get out to our community. But speaking of, another question from the chat, do similar efforts exist for satellite technology learning? Can add-on modules be created for these groups?
Certainly. One thing I would say about, there's this lovely connection between observing the night sky and how we observe the night sky and how we connect ourselves with what's beyond. And so, that includes things like, prospects for space travel. What does the future of humanity look like in that respect? Or things that are in orbit, technology. We are currently in discussion for Beyond the Stars in this upcoming year in working more on, we've more used telescopes to look out into outer space. And in this upcoming year, we're working on developing programming that's more related to how telescopes are built, where we actually build a telescope together and participants are able to get a bit more engineering kind of hands-on learning. I could very easily see this incorporating principles of like, how do we build satellites and why are satellites important? Really, the world is our oyster, kind of, as long as it stays within STEM, where we can connect it, in, I guess, space to some extent, because one core element of Beyond the Stars is we really want to use the cultural storytelling and practices. We center that first, and we use that as a motivation for looking out beyond into space. But I could easily see it being adapted to talk about things such as the space industry and how humans are getting out there.
Yeah, that'd be great. Carolyn, I believe you have your hand up.
I do. Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Heidi, thank you for today. And your comment about passion projects really resonates with me. I have 2 passion projects. One, my 2 daughters, who are both in STEM. One is a 5th grade math teacher in Anacostia. I would love any portion or part of the entire presentation you gave so that she could give it to her students and talk with them about, even in 5th grade, they need to be thinking how their math capabilities and skill sets can have an option within the stars. And it's a really unique way for her to resonate with her kids, because she looks very different than the student population in her classroom. And so she's always trying to find ways to make math fun and cool and really resonate. And secondly, I have a passion project in Tanzania. I run a 501c3 called SHADE. It's a school
Amazing.
with vulnerabilities who otherwise would never be educated. We're pre-K through 3rd grade, adding a grade every year to 6th grade. All of the things you spoke about with regard to training the teachers that will ultimately be the real teachers of these students, and really embracing the community is is so relevant in Tanzania. And again, whatever you're willing to share with this SSPI-WISE community, please know that with your blessing, it will be shared globally, because I've got a lot of little kids who look up in the sky and don't ever dream of being anything other than someone that's going to work on a farm. And if they can potentially think about being astronauts, we have made a big difference. And so thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to, in particular, our PASEA, after almost 12 years of running it, we have the largest Google Drive you could ever imagine of activities, even some activities that we've really iterated on for 10 years that are incorporate inquiry-based learning, which is where your students discover principles, like STEM content, learning principles on their own, as opposed to being taught them by an instructor. Some that we've written up in academic journals, for example, that we freely share these resources with. So yeah, I'm happy to dig up whatever I can and connect your communities with as well.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And I believe we have time for one more question before we get into the closing comments for the meeting. So I'd like to add, you were mentioning talking about how you sustain your programs long term. A little two-part question. As you're phasing out, getting more local teachers involved, what is your involvement long term? And in sustaining these programs, what does your funding model look like, and how you pull that together?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'll answer the first one. So, one thing that I've tried not to do over the years is sort of see these projects as like my baby, right? I support them and I put a lot of energy into them, but their success long term cannot be tied to any one member of the team, right? It has to be something that is community owned. As a team, we own it, I guess, in some sense. And people's lives happen, things happen, teaching team members turn over. There's a little bit of a revolving door aspect to it. In the case of PASEA, one thing specific, unique to PASEA that we've recognized is that as a team, our long-term goal for PASEA is that it is entirely led, like the future of PASEA, how it evolves in the future, all of that is entirely led by our African teaching team. It is inherently an African initiative. And so although it has been fostered by a global team, and I still think benefits from having like I said, a global teaching team, lots of different faces showing all the different types of people that do astronomy and are scientists. I think long-term, much of the decision-making and how it evolves needs to be led by our African astronomers and teaching team members. And that is where we're shifting into. It is a gradual process, but long-term for PASEA, that is our dream, is that it is entirely African owned and led, and because that is a community in which it serves. And so much of the decision making should be led by people from those communities, in my opinion, at least. And I hope to kind of see myself more as sort of like a person who visits and is a part of the teaching team and is able to contribute, because I still love going there and meeting the participants year after year. We now have almost 300 alumni, but certainly long term for that. Within the context of other initiatives, Astrodigenous is an online thing. So since I'm the only person who knows how to build databases on the team, I think I'll be working with that for a while and supporting that. In terms of sustainable funding, that is the $1 million question, literally. Educational initiatives like this I wish I could tell you that we've developed a really sustainable funding model and I just know how to make this work over long periods of time, and I don't. PASEA, even after almost 12 years, is entirely, the reason why we run it every 2 years is because it takes 2 years to pull together all of the funding to run the school. And one really core element of PASEA for us is that, and I forgot to highlight this, but every it is of zero cost to our participants. We pay their travel, regardless of where on the African continent they are. If they need to fly in, if they're accepted into school, we fly them into the host country. We pay for their accommodation, we pay for their food, we pay for their supplies, we pay for everything. We don't want cost to be any sort of barrier to participating in our school, but that takes money. And it means every 2 years we are on a fundraising jump to kind of pull together the money that is required to run the school and secure the accommodation and the venue and all these sorts of things. And every single 2 years, every other year, we are sitting down and piecemealing it, getting funding from little different pots of money. One of the challenges of having an international school is that governments love funding things that happen within their own countries and jurisdictions. They are less willing to throw money at something, you know, NSF, for example, different organizations, they like to fund things that happen in the United States, in Canada, and so they like to fund things that happen in Canada, and it's the same for everywhere. So we've been successful in securing funding for our personal travel to go places, but in terms of actually securing funding for the school, it happens piecemeal and it often happens abroad, and it can be quite challenging. And sometimes we're 6 months away from the school and we still have to pull together 10 grand, but it always comes together. And so one thing I've learned over the years is to just have optimism and hope, and where there's a will, there's a way. Other initiatives, you know, like for example, Beyond the Stars, I have an amazing support team here. It's about finding people who believe in what you're trying to do and are willing to contribute long-term to that. So there is no financial model that has worked for all of these initiatives I've discussed today, but I would say stay on the hustle, and recognize that funding is an incredibly important element to sustaining whatever you're doing over time. And so thinking a little bit long term. When you start something, I always think to myself, okay, if this goes on for 2 years, what do I need to be doing now to make sure that I can do what I want to do in 2 years? Sort of thinking, having a longer term kind of perspective is also pretty essential.
Great. Well, thank you for that, Heidi. I will pass it back to Tamara or Jamia to close the meeting out. But thank you again, and everyone's looking forward to seeing your resources coming up.
My pleasure. Thank you, guys.
Okay, I'm talking while I'm on mute. Heidi and Justina, thank you so much for your very, very, very excellent presentation. I'm going to spotlight Jamia for us now so she can close out the meeting.
Yeah, just want to echo thanks, Heidi. Thanks, Justina. That was a great discussion, and glad to hear from Carolyn, and great question from Mary as well. I know Justina mentioned the scholarships in the beginning of the meeting, but that is still open. So if you know of any college students, it's always good to give people the opportunity to go to the satellite, and hopefully see a bunch of you all there with all the events going on. So if you're out in DC in March, let us know, and look out for SSPI-WISE. And also International Women's Day is coming up, so we'll have stuff on that as well. Just look out for emails from Tamara. But otherwise, thanks to everyone for calling in today. And thanks again, Heidi and Justina.
Thank you, everyone. Have a lovely rest of today.